So I'm using the crap computer again, or the one the video doesn't work properly. But I can't be bothered to open up the other one. And you turn it on, and you have to wait like 10 minutes, and then you're just thinking, why is nothing working? And to get the camera to load up, and also when you record it and download it onto the, it took about 20 minutes to upload the video, which is incredibly annoying. But anyway, I'll just use this one for now. I had a client, and I like this guy. I've seen him quite a few times, and we were having a conversation about the One World passport and stuff, and I just kind of want to talk about it. Pros and cons as to why I think there should be some sort of one world passport that allows you to know who an identity is. There's a lot of corruption where people in this country, where people come to a country, earn lots of money, and then just send it back to their home country, and they're claiming asylum, or they're claiming reasons to be here, when really all they're doing is being here so that they can earn money and then build a mansion back in their home country. And I've heard more and more of these stories, and I definitely think that it's definitely happening. And one could argue that they just want to support their family, but another can argue that actually they're draining the resources in England. Shops are closing down, businesses in England are closing down because people aren't spending their money in England. They aren't keeping the English currency in England. They're earning the money in England and then sending it to other countries. So any people that do that, they're basically just draining the resources of that country. They're getting all the free healthcare and all the free advantages of paying high taxes and stuff. But a lot of builders, particularly, that they earn money, they try and hide it as much as possible, and then they just send it abroad. And this is happening more and more. And I think if they had some sort of world currency passport, something that had evidence of any houses that you own, and any it doesn't need to go into too much. This guy was saying that he used to be in favor of it, but then when the COVID came in and you found that you couldn't travel without an injection, he found that very wrong, and then was questioning who was going to control this sort of one world passport that people would have. You can't have someone using saying, oh, you can't go abroad unless you have an injection. I mean, I thought the whole COVID thing was a bunch of nonsense. Basically, there was one guy who made me convinced that it was a real thing, but that guy turned out to actually be a liar who's been pestering me with phone calls for the past few years. So I don't trust anything that he ever told me. So I don't know what the whole COVID thing was about. I mean, to me, it almost felt like it was about control, and seeing how much control they could have over people by scaring people into believing that there's some sort of virus, and then seeing if you can keep them locked up in their homes so that they get poorer. I mean, technically, if you've got huge rents to pay each month, and you find that you can't work for 6 months, how are you going to pay your bills? How are you going to pay for all that if you haven't been working? And he said that because he owned a limited company, he couldn't actually claim any benefits. People who were claiming a salary or claiming money through declaring tax could make money. I think they could get half of what they've been usually declaring and stuff. So I got something out of that, but yeah, he didn't get anything, and then therefore him and people who own companies but don't have proper salaries couldn't actually claim anything, and therefore I'm wondering if the whole COVID thing was about control. And well, if the elites are setting up a one world passport to just control people and make them poorer, then that's a bad thing. But I'm thinking things like my sister, how she was actually in the middle of a sort of divorce. She should have, she had a divorce coming up, and she could have got a £500,000 from that divorce. She didn't. She got less because she wasn't chasing up after it. She wasn't getting solicitors or anyone involved. She was actually just thinking, I don't want anything to do with this. I mean, technically, mentally ill people, part of their mental illness is lying. I'm thinking about that woman who was lying about the Epstein case. The number of things she said in it, and I don't know if I explained it very well because I was kind of analysing it myself, but to say that, oh, these guys treated me like a prostitute, and then use as an example for how they treated her like a prostitute, as saying that they bought her a £400,000 wedding ring and asked her to marry. One guy bought her a £400,000 wedding ring, asked her to marry him, and that they're just using me like a prostitute. I'm confused. Why would that, why would that story doesn't add up? And just a lot of things that she said, saying that there are lots of scientists there probing her, and then afterwards talking about them stealing her eggs and stuff. I mean, she's obviously completely delusional, and part of mental illness is to lie about things. Lie about, oh no, this isn't, if you're poor or if you're rich and you own a house and you own money, you're not going to tell people that, and therefore you need to have some sort of system in place where people can't just lie. If I do generally believe that a huge portion of Earth is just mentally ill. There's so many mentally ill people here. That show that I watched yesterday, where there was someone talking about how she wants bigger boobs, even though her boobs were absolutely massive. They looked completely fake. They almost looked uncomfortable fake, like any bigger and they'll just pop or something. Like it didn't look nice. I can't imagine how she sleeps at night, just knowing that she can't move about because you've got these big things. I'm thinking about Katie Price as well, and she actually looked kind of good, or she's famous for that, and she got a huge amount of fame, a huge amount of sort of image based on that. She got a huge amount of profile based on that. So I can kind of understand Katie Price going down that way, because she was kind of like seen as like the main one who did stuff like that. But to think that there's a whole bunch of other girls who will never get that kind of fame, because technically her lips were too big, that she looked kind of unreal and unfake. They looked very fake, and I don't think getting bigger boobs is going to make anything, but it's almost like a mental illness. She really liked getting them the first time round, just like my sister when she first bought the second 2-bedroomed house. She loved the excitement of getting this new house, that all she wanted to do was buy another new house, and just like forgetting about the enjoyment of having that, and trying to seek that same kind of enjoyment, and that is a mental illness. But the documentary focused on her mental illness and tried to understand, she was trying to explain to her that, do you not think you have a mental illness? And she was kind of trying to explain the reasons why she doesn't have a mental illness, even though she clearly does, and she's just in denial about it. But the documentary never talked about all the thousands of people, all the hundreds of people who would give her this kind of money to just damage her body, and the mental illness that they must have. I think if the documentary would have focused on who the clients were, or revealed who the clients were, I don't know if anyone would want to admit it, but find out who would pay for a girl who's got gigantic boobs to have even bigger boobs. It's like those the women that get fat. They have people that give them money just to get fatter and fatter, and it's almost a cruelness. I think that's a type of mental illness. This woman is way too big. She can't live a good life. She can't enjoy things. So what we're going to do, we're going to give her more money to just destroy herself. And, it's a self-destruction, but I think there's a type of person that enjoys paying money for people to destroy themselves even more, and make themselves even look faker or even nastier, and it's like, I don't know, vultures pecking on an animal, hoping that they get lower, like they get weaker and weaker, and then they can, I don't know, get some enjoyment from just laughing at them or something. I feel like there's a nastiness in people, and it's that bad, and I think the mental illness is everywhere, and part of mental illness is to not see things the correct way. You could say, oh, all I've earned this year is £100,000, and I should have got more for that modelling role. I should have got more for this, and then there's other people that are, and you forget about the other people that are actually struggling really hard, working long hours just to earn 20,000 a year, and you start not putting things in perspective, and seeing things wrong, because your life is so much better than others, but you can't really understand how others feel, because you start believing that you're better. And I guess you start thinking you earn more. You know, there are some people who earn lots of money and then have an accident and can't work, and then because they can't work, they can't pay the bills. Maybe they have high amounts to pay out children in boarding school or something like that, high loans, or you know, maybe all their money is invested in a company that can only be successful if they are working, and if they can't work, well, their company fails. Hence, even though they might be rich because the company's worth a lot, technically, if their company is actually just devaluing hugely, then they are losing far more than what they think. So, you know, PIP is about getting mentally ill, or helping people with mental illness or physical illness due to an accident or birth defects or whatever. But some people take advantage of that, and I think mentally ill people are the types of people that would take advantage of this by lying about assets, pretending that they don't own properties, pretending that they're not about to get £500,000 in a divorce settlement. Why? Because they want to chase after the £6,000 because they like the idea of someone else taking care of them. And I think that just with the amount of liars that there are, you need some sort of one world thing where people can't just be in a country, kill a bunch of people, and then just move to a different country and then claim to be completely innocent people. You know, that there needs to be some sort of passport that doesn't have to have all the details about everything. It just needs to know how many properties they own. So this should be a worldwide thing, unless I mean, if you want to avoid Muslim countries or something specifically, like, I think there's something about the Muslims that are inverted and completely against me, and therefore I don't know what to say about those countries, because I want the leaders to be on my side. I want the leaders to know that I'm God, but I've been living a life of poverty because no one gives a shit about me. So all their belief that people give a shit about God, that's bullshit. That's nonsense. This is people just creating something in their head and calling that God. It's people creating a delusion in their head and believing that they worship God because of their ability to hear some sort of delusions in their head. You know, that's all God's worshippers are about. And therefore, you know, the reality of who God is, me, and the what people believe that they treat, how people, you know, the number of people that say that they give a shit about God, or they care about God, or they just want to serve God, it's nonsense. It's all nonsense. And I think as soon as the religious people know, or the leaders particularly know that, I think they'll see things very differently. But yeah, I think, you know, one world is good, because then you have an idea of, people can't claim. You should say that if you want to get like benefits, or, you know, you need to have some sort of ID that links to any properties. You can't buy a property or have a bank account unless you've got this ID number. So if someone starts having loads of multiple accounts, if you start setting up multiple accounts at different banks, you know, you need to have some sort of, I guess we have the national insurance number. In England, we have a national insurance number, which I would see as this sort of ID. But if you were to say that you can't buy a house unless you give your national insurance number, you can't have a bank account unless you give your national insurance number, and then you have it on some sort of database. You know, I heard that they're creating some sort of, the EU and Europe as well, and England as well, and America as well, they're creating some sort of supercomputer that has huge amounts of information in it. And so yeah, I think I really do support the idea of there being some sort of supercomputer that has like information about different people, and everyone. But I think a lot of people won't like the idea of this, because they might think that, oh, what are you going to start saying, that if I don't get a vaccine and put something I don't know, something foreign into my body, then I'm not going to be able to travel. I don't think they like that idea, because they don't trust the government. A lot of people do not trust the government, and I don't trust the government either. The English government doesn't seem to be doing anything to help me, and what I'm hearing about them giving money to immigrants and paying for people's housing, which I done completely unjustifiedly. Like, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what is actually true. You know, if you want to keep the public believing that you're helping people. You can tell them that, oh yeah, we're helping all these, housing all these people, we're helping give money to all these different countries, and really you're not. You're just allowing people to work and then send the money home. I mean, maybe if they are saying we'll give £1 billion to Afghanistan, really what it could just mean is that they're looking at all the money that's going from England into back into Afghanistan, and it's not that the English government is actually giving them money, but rather it's just that there's obviously a lot of people in Afghan who are sending money and transferring, and if you have bank accounts, then you can kind of like work out who's sending what, and what people's real income is. But I think there should be a fair system, and people shouldn't be allowed to not pay tax whilst other people pay huge amounts. But right now I think tax is incredibly high, and I think if you've got a £16,000 worth of rent to pay each month, and that's the minimum you can have. I know there might be some people who are deliberately going for a more expensive place just so they can. I mean, if tax was done based on your earnings minus, like, not including your rent. So if you're allowed to not include rent as part of your tax money, then people could say, well, we're just going to have the most expensive property to live in, and we're going to use that as an excuse to not pay tax because I'm earning £3,000 a year and £3,000 a month, and my rent is £2,500 a month. When really that same person could actually be living in a studio flat, making a lot more money, but they don't want to be giving tax. I understand that there are some people that might start deliberately. If you said that tax didn't include rent money, there might be some people who deliberately go for the most expensive rent just to avoid tax, and I think that's unfair. So I feel like there should be an idea of what properties are the minimum, and if you work in a job that you need to work from home, so you need your own front door or something, there is a minimum of what you can pay, and therefore and therefore you shouldn't be allowed to. What I went through, I feel was wrong. That you to earn 22,000 a year whilst having to spend £6,000 on tax, £2,000 on bills. I didn't have to pay council tax. Council tax was included in the rent, but yeah, that was left for me 18,000, which meant that I only had £4,000 to live off all year. And because I managed to save £1,000, it meant that all year I spent £3,000, and that's just incredibly bad, because there are plenty of people who are getting on benefits and are getting £12,000 a year. So what, these people who never worked are living on benefits all their life get to live off £12,000 a year, whilst I'm stuck living off £3,000 and also feeling guilty about not paying tax. I didn't pay any tax at that. If I would have paid tax, I would have probably paid about £5,000 worth of tax, and I'd actually be in the minus figures. So I could not pay tax, but I didn't want to have to go through trying to explain why I didn't pay tax, which is that my rent was so expensive that I didn't know who to talk to about this. I don't understand I don't know where to go. I don't know where to go. If you wanted to have a conversation about tax, I don't even know where to go. You can't call a number. If there is some sort of tax number, it's probably a number that never gets picked up and just goes around in circles with some weird answering machine and stuff. So, but yeah. The government is incredibly bad. I know with the social services and the family court, getting through to the family court was an absolute nightmare, and it's a total joke. And Sophie's still, they've got custody of the child, but they haven't actually got custody of the child. The Leo is still under the registration, and they're still doing visits, and they should have ended this a couple of months ago, but they've prolonged it because he didn't have a DBS check, and because they got, apparently, I don't know, but it's just, I don't know. But I was thinking about a one world ID, and I do definitely think it is a very good idea, but who runs it is quite a good question. But and what's the purpose of it? And I think the purpose of the One World ID is to do proper checks on people. If people are starting to claim PIP because of mental illness, I think you need to recognise that people with mental illness are very capable of lying, very capable of saying rubbish to just get sympathy. They're sort of people that want to try and have people help them, and therefore lying to get this people help. There needs to be some sort of system where you can see how much people own, and yeah, and maybe even linked to partners. If someone is going through an X, and their partner used to earn huge amounts, then there maybe should be something about how much their partner earns. And so that way, if someone's trying to say, oh, I'm having a divorce, someone's having a divorce, and is trying to claim PIP because they're broke, you need to actually find out how much that the partner is, how much that partner was earning. Because if that partner was incredibly rich, then PIP should not be about taking mentally ill people and giving them more money even if they're incredibly rich and don't need it. PIP should be about taking mentally ill people or disabled people out of poverty. Now, you don't have to be poor, because technically you could be very rich and then find that you become very poor within a short time because of your disability. So I feel like it shouldn't be done on how much money you have, but rather on your sort of your costs, your monthly spendage should be done versus your past salary versus your versus what you're actually spending. And if it turns out that some people are claiming PIP whilst refusing to seek massive divorce settlements, then I don't think PIP should be allowed for these people, because part of their mental illness is obviously seeking the wrong things. And I don't know what it's to say about people who live in England, earn lots of money, and then just send it back to different countries. I think there should be a stop on it, but because it's wrong. I mean, it's the reason why England is falling apart right now, because too many people are working here from abroad, and they're just sending the money away. So England's just getting poorer and poorer, and I think this is happening all over Europe. But I don't know, one could argue that I feel like the first class and the third class are disappearing, and this is because of all the immigration that's happening. But is that necessarily a bad thing? To have a world where first class worlds don't exist and third class worlds don't exist, and everyone in the world is just a second class. Is that really such a bad thing? I mean, it is if you liked living in a first world country and now you're living in a third or a second world country. I feel like England's a second world country now, and I think a lot of places in England, in Europe, seem to be going this direction. So is that a bad thing, though? Because third world countries are not nice places. So is it a bad thing that third world countries are becoming more like second class countries because of all the money that is being taken from the first class? I mean, is that a bad thing? I think it is a bad thing if the people are bad, if the people are corrupt, if the people are just liars or mentally ill. But yeah, I think a one world test needs to come to try and judge people not by anything other than their thoughts, their beliefs, how they are, how they want to live their life, and their standards. And I think people shouldn't be able to claim benefits if they're actually much richer than they are claiming, and therefore you need some sort of system that can actually work out. You cannot buy a house unless you have this ID, and you cannot claim benefits unless you have this ID, because the point of this ID is to check to make sure you're not extremely wealthy. If you are owning a house that's worth £1 million whilst on benefits, why are you on benefits when you've got an expensive house? You need to sell your house, you need to move into a smaller house, and then you can live off the money. If you've got £1 million flat and you sell it and go and live in a £500,000 house, elsewhere in a different part of England, you now have £500,000 to play with, and you shouldn't be expecting the government to fund you just so you can stay in London. You shouldn't say that I have a right to live in London, and because I can't afford it, because I can't work, I'm now expecting the government to just pay for everything when I'm sitting in an expensive house. Because I didn't get to stay in London because I didn't have an expensive house. But if I did have an expensive house and I couldn't work, then I would sell my house and go and get a smaller house and then live off the money that I've made. That should be sufficient, and you shouldn't be allowed to claim benefits. And I guess there's also a lot of people that from other countries come here and claim housing benefit, and I suppose it depends on what kind of housing benefit is. If it's a small amount, then fine. But if you're literally just getting free housing, free accommodation, why? Why are you getting that? It doesn't make any sense. Unless, of course, it's just lies that the government are telling because they're trying to they're trying to tell people that we're helping people when really we're not. I don't know.